Welcome everyone to another video. We have a guest joining us this week. As you can see, we've got Mr. Devon Scott with us. Devon, how are you doing?
Fantastic, fantastic. A little on the cool side here in the Dallas area today, so I'm a little bundled up. I got my coffee, but I'm doing great.
Excellent. Yeah, and you're not that far from me. I'm in Southeast Louisiana. I'm a hop, skip, and a jump away from New Orleans. Been to Dallas once or twice. So went watch the Cowboys and the Saints play. It didn't go in our favor, unfortunately, but hey, it was a
Oh,
great trip.
well, I definitely just came back from a visit to the USS Alabama Memorial Park, Battleground State Park there, and the SS United States. And of course, if I'm going to be driving, I actually left out of Houston. I said, if I'm going to be driving through New Orleans, I'm stopping and finding food. So we did
Oh
spend
yeah.
a little time in New Orleans with some jambalaya on the list of things to do.
Excellent. Well, and next time you're in the area, and we pulled back the curtain a little bit, we were kind of talking a little bit before we started recording, and turns out we're big ocean liner fans. We know a little bit about World War II history as well. I would highly recommend the National World War II Museum to you. It is incredible.
We were very tempted. We just didn't quite have the time to spend. It looks like you're going to need a pretty full day if you go to that museum.
You do. Yes, you most certainly do. It is huge.
And
But
I did have. If you ever get a chance to go to the World War I museum, I think that's in St. Louis. Is that where we were? Because I was actually in Missouri visiting friends and family there, and was treated to the World War I museum, and it was fantastic. Really, really good.
okay, I'll have to add that to the bucket list.
Yep.
So you mentioned a trip to see the USS Alabama and the SS United States. Well, that is actually how we met a few weeks ago. You were, you maybe say our docent or our tour guide. We did the Blakely State Park tour. As viewers of my channel will know, I did a video on that, and yeah, for the portion where we were up close to the SS United States, again, you were like our tour guide, so to speak, for that portion of the tour. How did that come about for you?
Actually, I was very, very fortunate that that did come about. Um, Gosh, over a year ago, I had done a road trip to Florida, and coming back through, we saw the Alabama, and we didn't have time to stop. I said, man, I really want to come back and see the Alabama. It looks like a really good park. There's a lot of planes out there, and I'm also an
Yeah.
aviation nut. So I said, one of these days. And then when the SS United States was relocated from Philadelphia to Mobile, I said, I really want to go see the Big U one more time. And since she's right there close, that's just
Yeah.
too much all piling up. I got to go. I got to go see her. I
Yes.
wanted to make sure I had a chance to go see her before the funnels come off and before too much work had been done.
Yeah.
I'd seen her several times in Philadelphia, went with specifically with the mind of going to Philadelphia and sitting in the restaurant at the IKEA across the street and looking at the Big U and taking pictures of the fence. So I said, yeah, here's a chance to get up close and personal. And of course,
Yeah.
the park tour popped up on my Facebook feed on one of the many ocean liner groups and pages I'm part of, and I immediately went to try to book, and they were sold out. I mean, just immediately sold out. So I contacted them and said, "Hey, if you need a little bit of information about the ship, I'd be happy to provide you some background, a little bit of history, things of interest. And also, if you add any more cruises on this particular date, I'm going to be in town to see the ship in the Alabama. Would love to have gotten in. I just missed out." And they immediately emailed back and said, "Oh yes, we'd love to get some information. If you're willing to kind of play tour guide a little bit, we can put you on board." That afternoon's cruise. So I was very honored and very fortunate to have had that just to kind of come into being, and had a really great time doing it. I was so impressed with that whole little harbor cruise because I didn't
Yeah.
even realize the Liberty ships had been built there. I had no idea some of the other things that went on in that port. And I got to give Captain Mike just tons of credit. His mastery of that little pontoon boat was so
Oh, he
impressive
was
to me.
wonderful. He was
Oh my
wonderful.
gosh. and he just set up the most beautiful views. And I haven't even looked at the video yet. I've got tons of video I've got to review. But then he would do it for the port side, then he'd swing around. Here you go for the guys on the starboard side, and
Right.
just an amazing. I know there's another, the little Perdido Queen kind of paddle boat thing that does kind of dinner cruise, but
Yeah.
I kind of wonder. I don't know how much kind of exterior decks and how close they can get, being a slightly larger vessel, but being that we
Mhm.
were on that pontoon boat to get right up that
We
close
were
to the
close.
ship.
Yeah.
That was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And
I
so,
told people on one of my live streams right after the fact, I was explaining to them how I recorded it. I recorded all that footage with my GoPro, which tends to have a very wide lens. And I was
right.
explaining to them, like, this video doesn't really do justice of how close to the ship we actually got.
Mm-hmm. You felt like you'd reach out and touch the side of the hull. That's
Yes.
amazing. And of course, I lucked out. Again, I said this was a very fortunate trip, especially that we had such wonderful weather and everything just timed out perfectly. Uh,
Yeah.
I always check out the Airbnbs in the area, and I actually found an Airbnb that's sort of a guy's kind of man cave, an apartment he kind of cobbled together over his workshop that is across the street from the ship.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
on the berth side of things. So we had this little Airbnb that we could sit out on the deck. I watched the sun come up right in front of the prow of the ship, just right across the street, and then we walked down and walked around the corner, and between there was a railroad track, a little bit of the docks, and then the ship right there. So we got some good
Right.
footage and a good up close look the first night from the port side, and then the next afternoon we got to see the starboard side from the water, which was just, it's so amazing when you
That's
get a
incredible.
chance, yeah, to get up alongside the ship. As you're aware, as I told you, I got into the United States and became very involved with the SS United States because of my involvement with the SS Norway, which had originally been the ocean liner France.
Yes.
And one of the things that happened when the France became the Norway, the first mega cruise ship, which is funny to say now because the mega cruise ships absolutely
Right.
dwarf the Norway. But at the time,
Right.
she was still the longest ocean liner ever built. And yeah, there's the France right there. There's such a beautiful ship.
She is a good looking
Uh,
ship.
I explain to people all the time. I lived aboard as the ship's historian. And one of the things I had to explain was we're a Caribbean cruise ship now as the Norway. And as a result, because this is a proper ocean liner with a proper deep V hull, we can't dock like the other ships. We draft too much. So up on the forecastle, there were actually World War II era landing craft that had been converted into what they call Little Norway 1 and Little Norway 2. And we had these massive davits that we would lower down, and we tendered ashore almost everywhere we went other than Miami. We
Right.
could dock in Miami, but everywhere else. And when I first got on board, people had left horrible comments about that. They were very disappointed. And I said, well, I can tell you why. The corporate policy at the time was to keep that a secret. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody that we're going to be tendering. Don't tell anybody. And
Mhm.
the cruise news came out and said, oh, we'll be dropping anchor at 6 in the morning at whatever port of call in the Caribbean, St. Thomas or St. Martin, which gave people the impression that by 7 o'clock you'd be able to go ashore. But tendering thousands of people, even though they were double deckers and we had two of them, it still took a
Right.
couple hours to get.
Right.
So there was a lot of grumbling. I said, no, no, no. We need to reposition that. We need to start from the very beginning and telling people you're going to get a smoother ride because you're on an old ocean liner. You're going to get this experience. But most importantly, when you get on those tenders, what you have is the most incredible photo op of one of the most beautiful ships in the world.
Right.
And we actually, after we started doing that, wound up, the tenders ran back and forth on a schedule all day long in port anyway, but we would get these comment cards and then people would come up and tell us we have we purposely took the tender 2 or 3 times so that we could get
Right.
pictures of the ship. And when things slowed down during the day, a couple of the guys who ran the tenders would purposely go out and do a couple of laps around the ship before they would come alongside. So that, yeah, if anybody asked, they were more than happy
Yeah.
to do it,
Now,
especially our
I've seen a
Norwegian
few.
crew members.
I've seen a few shots of her in the Caribbean, and wow, yeah. But
Oh,
I
just
put the
beautiful.
Normandy in here just
Hmm.
because I wanted to point out that France was built for the same line that operated the Normandy, correct?
Correct. Correct. CGT, which La Compagnie Générale Transatlantique, which we just call the French line.
Hmm.
And the France was actually a replacement for Normandy because, of course, Normandy was seized to become a troop ship. She was technically no longer Normandy; she was Lafayette.
Right.
When a fire broke out there in New York, and unfortunately, due to some inexperience and just a series of unfortunate events, they put so much
Yeah.
water onto her that she turned over
She
and laid down on
capsized.
her side, and that was the loss of the Normandy. But they'd learned an awful lot from the construction of the Normandy, and when they built the France, it was a matter of national pride to
Mhm.
replace the Normandy with an even better ship. And I
Right.
obviously never had the chance to sail on Normandy, but
Right.
I think they succeeded because the technologies, uh, the things they came up with. Some people would ask, why in the world would they make the ship too long to go through the Panama Canal? She was over 1,000 feet long. Why would they do that? Well, it was actually because they had calculated out the average distance between the crests of waves while crossing the Atlantic Ocean and wanted the ship to be a length that would allow her to basically ride atop three crests so that she wouldn't pitch as badly. And so they eliminated a lot of pitch by making the ship as long as they did. And they had some of the if you look at the hull out of the water, there's some very similar waist lines to the Normandy, even though the Normandy was reportedly quite the roller. They eliminated a lot of that with a the French didn't have a full on bulbous bow, but they had started to
Mhm.
figure out that rounded shape toward the front. And of
Right.
course, she had the big stabilizers. So the France was a very, very stable ship. Now, as the Norway in 1980, they added some upper decks. And being that she was not crossing the Atlantic, she was in the Caribbean most of the time. They had this extra uh, large blocky walls to catch the wind up top and then extra ballast in the bottom. I always
Mhm.
thought it was peculiar that she would develop a circular motion pitch. If you stood back on the near the superstructure on the forecastle and looked forward, you could see the prow creating like this circle, the
Really?
circular motion. Yeah, it was very, very
Okay.
unusual to watch, but that was a result of the add-on decks, and definitely not what you would have experienced crossing the Atlantic. That was another thing that we. I'm very proud to say that during my time on board the Norway, they thought that the ship had plateaued. They really thought, this ship has been in operation for so long, having gone in service in 1980, and the first time I sailed on her was in 1999 as a passenger. They thought, she's never going to make any more money than she's making now. She had the most sea days of any ship in the fleet. She had 3 days at sea, and you know, she is what she is. She's going
Right.
to be. She's going to have her fans. She's going to have her detractors. But we were able to achieve the highest customer satisfaction survey scores in the ship's history, and a lot of that had to do with playing up the ship's nostalgic and historic nature rather than trying to hide it. Uh,
Right.
some of the things that we got complaints about, I said, look, let's turn that around and make them positives. Everybody would complain, why is there a 2x4 to stub your toe on getting in and out of the bathroom? And when you explained, well, because on a transatlantic voyage, you didn't want the water to splash out onto the carpet, so you had to have a lip there. If you notice on all of because all of the cabins aboard the ship, with the exception of sadly the lamps, the desk lamps, the designer that changed the ship from the France to the Norway wanted to try to eliminate as much of France as possible to make sure that the ship was distinctly Norway. But really, they were only changing the public spaces. The only thing they could do in the cabins was to throw away those lamps. And the rumor is they literally threw them overboard and they were lost. You can't find one uh,
Wow.
that I've ever come across. No one's got one of the original France lamps that came from the staterooms. But the aluminum chests of drawers and such were all original. So I'd point out, look at the lip that goes around the top of those surfaces? Why would there be this big inch tall lip around there? Same reason there's a 2x4 going into the bathroom. And
Right.
when you start pointing out things as being, think of this as a quaint old bed and breakfast with quirks and character, not flaws. It's
Right.
character. People always complained about the elevators. I said, well, the elevators are the original elevators. They weren't built for this many people. There's 2 more decks added onto the ship, so there's more people than the ship was originally designed for. Plus, they're the original elevators from 1960.
Hmm.
And so then we'd make the joke. The trick of it is, take the elevator upstairs, take the stairs downstairs, because that's gravity fed. And
Right.
with all of the food you're going to be eating this week, a couple of extra stairs are probably a good idea. And you would and because of that, and this one old promotional film that I would show, people would always giggle at the point where everyone's standing there waiting for the elevator to come. And it got to be the day after I would show that film, especially, you'd have people standing around in front of the elevators laughing and cutting up about waiting for the elevators. But then the conversation would then go toward, but isn't she a grand old ship?
Right.
Isn't this such an experience to be able to be, part of this history? And so we really did a turnaround, and we did a couple of other little minor things. And not only did we increase the customer service surveys, we managed to increase profitability, which they didn't think that was going to be happening. In fact, I had the CFO came on board and said, I'm trying to figure out what you're doing. We have port and cruise consultants who book cruises for your next NCL cruise while you're on board. On all the other ships, if you're in the Caribbean, you book an Alaskan or you book a Hawaiian. People on the Norway book the same cruise next year on the Norway. I said, yeah,
Nice.
they're coming back for the ship. They're coming for the
Right.
character and the experience. They also want those 3 sea days. It took a little fighting and a little pushing, but we managed to have one of the sea days, the international deck. We were able to kind of close it off, and one of the most original rooms on the ship, Club International, as we called it on the Norway, which was originally a first-class lounge on the France, with a lot of the original ceiling fixtures and some of the original look of the ship. We called it the formal on the France party. So the second formal night, if you weren't formal, you didn't go on that deck and you didn't go into that room to create that ambiance. And the captains just loved it. They absolutely loved it. We had a couple of bands, one in particular that would play. I projected this old black and white promotional film, and they had timed out their set to be playing music that went along with what was being shown on the film. And of course, as soon as the ship comes into New York, they start doing New York, New York, and everybody cheers. And there was actual
Right.
dancing. It was really cool to
Right.
recreate that vibe of the transatlantic crossing, the formal night on a crossing. So playing up that kind of thing is what they work. When I was on board, right after I went on board, Star Cruises out of Asia bought the ship, bought the cruise line. Excuse me, they bought the entire cruise line, and immediately I laughingly call him my arch nemesis. The new CEO of NCL had this vision that he called freestyle cruising. And while I was in total agreement with him, he was absolutely right. We did get complaints from people going, I didn't want to be seated at a table with a bunch of strangers. Now, to me, that was a plus. To be seated at a tin top table on a crossing or on a cruise and meet some of my fellow passengers. I'm a gregarious, outgoing type of person, but
Hmm.
he could read the writing on the walls. And the new NCL ships were designed to have restaurants like a land-based restaurant, where you could go in and get a table for 2 or a table for 4 with your party. And these ships are a lot bigger. They can accommodate that. They don't have to have an early and a late seating the way we still did on the Norway. So I thought it was a bit of a downer that wasn't happening, but that was a
Right.
selling point. So they originally had said, yeah, well, the Norway's time has come and gone, and we're going to get rid of the ship. And that's when we set about to basically create enough of well, one, increase profitability, increase return sailings, and promote the ship in a way that, despite having what was sold and billed as a farewell crossing, she actually did return to service after going to Bremerhaven for dry dock. That's a great picture there too. I really love that picture.
This is her being converted to the Norway, correct?
Yep, I do believe so.
Okay.
If I'm correct, I can already see some blue going on there along the bottom, and
Right.
of course, her initial conversion, they did not add the other decks on. The other decks weren't put on until
Till later
uh,
on.
yeah, later on down the line. So when she originally went from France to Norway, uh, the only difference was the color scheme outside. Basically,
Right.
went from the black and red to the blue and white, two shades of blue and white mostly.
Mhm.
So very much just looked like the France, unless you looked really
Right.
closely. There was a popular area for ship geeks. Uh, the swimming pool that was located just behind the forward funnel originally had been an atrium for these odd little cabins that were long and narrow and usually had like a just a twin bed along the wall. But the big perk of them was you had this recessed patio that you could step out of a back door from your cabin and sit out and have coffee or tea or whatever you wanted to do and enjoy. It's kind of a conversation pit up on deck. So
Right.
keep in mind that if you're crossing the Atlantic Ocean at a hefty clip, it's going to be pretty windy out on deck. So here was a way to go outside and see the stars or see the sky and be down. Well, they used that space on the Norway to lower a swimming pool to give it a Caribbean ship needed a swimming pool. So one of the smaller pools that they added was just lowered into that space. Well, if you knew where to go on the right deck, you could actually get underneath that swimming pool and walk around. And they had these large porthole windows. You could look into the swimming pool,
Oh,
but you could
wow.
also see the doors that led into those cabins. And the one access door was the original France door. There was these wrought iron circles. And so it was one of the original pieces. Very hidden, very buried. But if you could find it, that was a big treat for the ocean liner fans to go find the
Nice.
patio and yeah, and get on board. I often said during my lectures and stuff that the SS France can still be found under the SS Norway. She's wearing a layer of cosmetics and makeup to be the Norway, but if you look around and look up and pay attention, you will see traces of the France all over the place.
Mhm.
There was famously the outline of the name France on the prow that you could still see if the light hit it just right where the
Mhm.
letters have been welded on. And I actually managed to get a really great picture of that, which is hard to do. It took me about 80 attempts to get a picture where you can actually see it. And the one that I pointed out the most frequently was on the second floor of the theater. The steps going into that room were just treacherous. So you're going into a theater that might already be dark and you're trying not to fall and kill yourself. So as a result, you're always looking forward and down. No one ever stopped to look up and back behind them. And over both doors was an original piece of France artwork, this
France.
glass
Nice.
sculpture art that if you just stopped and knew where to look. Now, I did have to warn a lot of people. You've probably seen some of the feedback with the SS United States of people online going, well, I never really thought the United States was all that pretty of a ship. Mostly because
Hmm.
when you think about the great ocean liners, you think about the Olympic Titanic, the Queen Mary, you think about the deco, you think about the wood, the rich
Right.
wood look. And of course, Big U being built to be fireproof was all metal and somewhat
Mhm.
stark. Well, the France was built in France in 1960, which
Right.
the design and the motif, some people said it's MCM. I don't quite consider it mid-century modern.
Mhm.
You look back the pictures, and I will admit most of the interiors to me were just really ugly.
Uh, and on her exterior, though, honestly, she when I look at her, I think QE2.
Yeah,
Maybe
yes,
because they're from the similar era, so they are
right.
somewhat kind of similar looking. But yeah, when I look at her, QE2 only had one funnel, but still in all, I kind of see shades of QE2 in her.
Right, you could see where the design was going there, but you would definitely compare the Norway, well, the France, I should say, closer in with the SS United States, especially with timing of construction and stuff. The Big U was built just before the France was built, and
Yep.
you were getting away from the wood. You were trying to be more modern. You were trying to be more slick. So if you're expecting the Queen Mary and those beautiful, and I only recently learned that the designer of the Queen Mary, despite doing a beautiful job, actually hated Art Deco and did not want to do the ship because he did not want to do Art Deco, which is, to me a plus. I love the interiors on the Mary. So it
Right.
was funny to show people some of the pictures of the France, and they were kind of shocked. And then they started realizing that some of these odd wall panel and artwork, where there was a little, I think it was a perfume store, had originally been the music room. It's like, go into that room and stop looking at the display shells that they're selling and look at the walls. They're
Right.
absolutely beautiful. They're this etched aluminum, and they're gorgeous. But it's definitely, 1960s aesthetic,
Right.
a different
Now, I
thing.
want to go into a little bit of like her early history because like you said, the Big U predates her by 10, 11 years or so.
Right?
She's coming in at the very end of the
Oh,
transatlantic era.
way too late. Way too late.
Yeah. So, how long is she actually the France, and she's turning a profit before jets just completely wipe them all out? Because in the '60s, you lose the SS United States, you
Right.
lose the Mary, you lose the Elizabeth. They're all getting
Hmm.
retired. So,
Right.
what is her story there?
Yeah, there was a point where the France, uh, the Queen Mary, and the United States were the only three that were running a transatlantic route, and that's because aviation took such a rapid
Yeah,
evolution from starting out with the Pan Am Clippers that were, of course, flying boats, amazing vessels in and of themselves. Then they quickly started coming up with uh, applying wartime aviation knowledge to uh, some of the early aircraft that were
civilian.
capable
Yeah,
of yeah, the civilian aircraft were basically converted bombers, and then of course the jet quickly came on, and just boom, now all of a sudden, why would anybody want to spend 5, 6, 7 days on a ship when you could spend a couple of hours on an airplane? So the jet age came in and just clobbered it. I do not believe, and someone could fact check me here, I don't think the France was ever profitable. She was subsidized by the French government, as are most ocean liners,
hmm,
so that they can be used as a troop transport or a hospital ship during times of war. But also with
right,
the France, just like like with modern Airbus, the A380 would never have existed had the French government not paid for a large portion of the construction of those amazing aircraft. It was the same thing. In order to keep French union workers employed and doing things, uh, they were footing the bill. So I don't believe the France ever made money. And in fact, just like the Big U left service early because they just couldn't book it out, it was a strike that eventually broke the camel's back in 1974, that took the France and wound up putting her off in a side spot where she sat and never came back. They thought, yeah, we'll get her back in service here soon, but it just never ever happened. So you figure
right,
she did her maiden voyage in 1962, and by 1974 she was out of business.
right.
She was done. So that's a relatively short career when you look at ships like the Olympic that
Oh,
we
for
were talking
sure.
about before we started recording. Olympic
Right.
came out before the Titanic and was 1935 when she was finally sold to the breakers, and much to the
Hmm.
chagrin of a lot of people.
Agreed.
So, of course, when you're talking about a French ship, she had one big selling point that could overcome her competitors, and that's, of course, the food. You're going to have the wonderful French food and the service. They had so many crew members to take care of people. Uh, we still had the original vanity desks, vanity tables in most of the staterooms, and in some of the corridors and some of the staterooms, if you found the right ones, they purposefully had put filters on the light, kind of like a light pink shade, and that was to help the ladies have a glow when they're walking in the lighted areas because she did have fluorescent lighting, which is kind of harsh usually. So they went to a great extent to make sure that their guests were well treated. Uh, she was designed, even though I say she was really the last one primarily designed as a thoroughbred ocean liner. When QE2 was being built, they knew absolutely for sure there was going to be a lot of cruising involved. It was just a reality of the business by that time.
Right.
The France was built well. We could do some cruising, but she was hard separated. There was a first class area, and then you had a tourist class. Now, they only did two classes, even though it was sort of like you've got your third class cabins that are way
Right.
down low, and they're the cheap ones, but the public areas were shared between second or tourist and third class. So they kind of lumped them together into tourist. But there was, you still didn't cross the line between first and tourist. When they converted to the Norway, they had to do a lot of things to open the ship up because
Right.
the only public accesses, in fact, the theater, the reason there was a mezzanine in the theaters, the second floor was the first class, and the first floor was the tourist class, and there was not a stairway that connected them.
Right.
You
Now
you
it's
couldn't
it's
go there.
also worth mentioning that first, second, and third class in 1962 did not mean what first, second, and third class meant in 1912.
Right, exactly. The steerage and third class would definitely not be the same thing. Steerage is basically cargo class. Um,
Right.
we actually did use on the France for the Norway a lot of our crew cabins, especially for the dance troops and musicians and stuff. Those were the third class, the tourist class cabins that would have been the cheaper cabins. Uh, Sold on the ship, and they were in some very peculiar places down in these down in these little holes and such. And you're like, okay, I
Right.
can't believe they actually sold these cabins, but oh yeah, they did. They packed them in there. So yeah, she was known as just a very luxurious. The food was incredible. They had the beautiful theater. There were multiple uh, ballroom type club areas, regions where there was the entertainment and the dancing and such. So I think the experience of the France was billed as and presented as being a little more old world charm and even though modern, very modern, in a very French way.
Right.
It was the nation's, it was the French's. We still had a lot of French people who would come on board, and they would refer to the ship as the France. They would not say the Norway. This is the France, and
I
all was
get
real
that. It's
big.
it's a pride thing.
Very much so, and you could tell in the construction and the things they had done. It was kind of sad that even I was fortunate. I had a tourist class cabin to myself that could no longer be rented out because it was directly underneath one of the added on davits that lowered those giant tenders. So it's kind of like sleeping next to a train track. You had to get used to that noise
Right.
early in the morning. But I didn't mind because my bathroom had all those little 1 inch pink tiles and was completely original. And I often got asked about this weird looking towel rack that was in the bathrooms and all the original cabins. Like, well, though this was it is a steamship, they used to route the steam up through those so that you could have heated towels.
Hmm.
And that was just one of the kind of perks that they had, even in the tourist class cabins.
Right.
So, yeah, very lots of little touches, lots of little niceties that they did. Um, uh, I just thought of something I'll share with you because you'll appreciate it. Of course, I've been a little bit. I don't know. I think it's kind of funny that with all of the news attention that the SS United States is now getting, which I wish back when I was involved in around 2010, 2011, I wish we could have gotten the kind of media attention then than we're getting,
Right.
the ship is getting now. But I have
Right.
noticed that the pronoun it has been used extensively for referring to the ship. Well, as an ocean liner enthusiast, you're no doubt aware of the fact that a ship is a she.
Yes.
However, in my research for the Norway and the France, I do not speak French, which was kind of funny because a lot of French guests who came on board just assumed if I were going to be the ship's historian for the Norway, I would speak French, and they were somewhat disappointed when I went, no, sorry, no French here. I know a few words, and I can tell you where to find a certain things, you know, if you use the French term. But other than that, and I had been gifted several beautiful, wonderful books. That I love the pictures, but I can't read them because they're in French. But one of my friends who uh, speaks fluent French advised me that, well, in French, almost everything is masculine, unless it has to deal with gender or romance, was the way they put it. And then it's feminine, but everything else is masculine. And which kind of made me go, well, wait a minute. So that means the France would have been referred to as it or he, and was told, oh, absolutely, the France was referred to as he. It would have been a masculine pronoun. You know, that whole thing. If I had to pick a ship that had a masculine feel, a friend of mine who owned a P-51 Mustang, I referenced the pronoun she once, and he said, oh, no, trust me, if you ever fly one, he's definitely a he, and he's grumpy. Nothing eloquent or ladylike about a P-51 Mustang. So, but I think the France probably still, uh, yeah, I think the France would appropriately have been a he and had that uh, air, the French air, because most of the staff, you know, nowadays we think of stewardesses more frequently, but you have mostly male staff on board the France, from the stewards and the maitre d' and the dining room attendants and so forth and so on. You'd be very hard pressed to find ladies working aboard the France. Definitely
Devin,
another time, right?
I think your camera froze on us. I can hear you just
Uh-oh.
fine, but yeah, it looks like your camera might have froze. She finishes her career as an ocean liner in 1974, and she essentially goes into, I guess you could say, mothball, for lack of a better
Right,
term.
right.
At what point does Norwegian Cruise Line decide to purchase her, and when it would be her maiden voyage as a cruise ship?
Right. So there's actually an interesting story about that I have come across. Some recent claims to say it may not have really happened, but who knows? And in ocean liner lore, it's kind of fun to have it in there anyway. So
Hmm.
Newt Kloster was the man who started what was then called Norwegian Caribbean Lines. Obviously, he is from Norway. He's a Norwegian, and he had the White Fleet, which were today, if you were to see the White Fleet, you'd go, oh my gosh, they're so tiny. Uh, they were tiny little ships, but he was the first one who had this idea, hey, let's sail around in the Caribbean. Things were going well, but he said, what we really need is a bigger ship. We're going to need a bigger boat. We got to
You're
have
gonna need a
something.
bigger.
And of course, he wanted something with the ability to do big shows and big entertainment and add more shipboard appeal, in addition to the ports. Even though it's kind of ironic that now it's the world's kind of come back around, and I found that most cruisers will tell you that they want to go on a cruise for the ports of call, which is strange to me because you're there what, an hour, and then you got to run back to the ship. I want to see the ship. You know, I would love to do the Oasis of the Seas, just to see that massive, incredibly large chunk of metal.
They are
That's a big ship.
behemoths. I've
It
seen
just
two of the seas ships.
uh
I think one was a lure. I forget what the other one is. I mean, they are absolutely massive and hideous.
yeah, they're floating buildings, but they're
Yes,
still amazing to me. Definitely
in their own way.
feats.
Yes.
Yeah, feats of architecture, and I'm amazed by them. I remember how many people would complain on the Norway about, oh my, there's so many people crammed into this space. Well, I know it's a bigger ship, but I believe Oasis with passenger and crew is like 10,000 people aboard that vessel. That's,
Mhm.
that's a city. That's
Yes.
amazing. So the story goes that Kloster had decided to buy a ship and was actually enamored with the SS United States. There's possibly sort of the inference was the U.S. flag was appealing because if you're into cruising, you're probably aware of the Passenger Services Act, which is sometimes referred to as the Jones Act, which is oh, like 100 years old. The intent was to give American flag vessels an edge over foreign flag vessels. It basically says that a foreign flag vessel cannot sail between two U.S. ports. So if you're ever wondering why you're doing a cruise and suddenly you have to run off to an international destination, that's because you're not on a U.S. flagged ship. You've got to make a call to a non-U.S. port. So there's an advantage to having an American flagged ship that allows you to cruise without having to leave U.S. ports and make that other stop. I don't know how big a factor that really was to Closter. He just was really looking for a big ship. Now, the story goes that the United States was the one he first went after, primarily because at that point in time, they had attempted multiple auctions. And by they, I mean MARAD, because United States Line had gone out of business. And since the Big U was built as a partnership with the government and as a military transport in time of need, MARAD, the Maritime Administration, wound up with the SS United States not having any idea what to do with this ship. They had tried a number of auctions and either got well, the first one they attempted, nobody sent in the required 10% deposit, so the whole auction was just a non-event. And then after that, they had problems with people going, "Yeah, I'll make this bid," but they couldn't buy the ship because parts of the ship were still classified. The parts of the
Right.
power plant and the propellers were classified. So unless you were a U.S. interest going to operate with a U.S. flag, you couldn't buy the SS United States. So the story goes that Closter gave up on trying to get the United States because of the fact that he was a Norwegian company and a Norwegian interest. So instead, he turns and sees that the France is languishing in a backwater in France, and makes a deal to finally purchase the SS France in sometime in 1979. I believe it was, because the deal probably happened in 78, and by 79 the deal was done, and they started the conversion. And by 1980, the ship had been rechristened as the Norway, and then would actually sail as the Norway cruise ship until 2006, which is a pretty amazing
That's impressive.
long, yeah, very long, and especially that she was able to hold her own as other cruise ships became bigger and more interesting, and different offerings. There's a great picture showing the QE2 and the Norway with what we called the ugly hat. The ugly
Yeah,
hat
because
was
now she's got that added structure on top of the
yes,
bridge.
which a lot of people hated to see that happen, but it was just an economic requirement that they had to add those extra decks, and those cabins were just horrible. Um, they were modular square things that were thrown together and slapped up on top of the ship, and just really, really took a long time for people to get used to seeing those beautiful curving, graceful lines of the ship
Yes.
capped off by those cinder blocks.
Yeah. And
uh,
it's an eyesore for sure, but I mean the economics. I mean, I get why
yeah,
they had to do it.
yeah, absolutely had to put them on there, and changed a lot of the characteristics about the ship when that happened. Uh, but luckily, it didn't stop her from still being one of the most popular cruise ships in history. Now, I credit a lot of that to the fact that when Closter, he wanted to go big. So when nowadays you go on board a cruise ship and you'll see a shipboard cast that they've hired to do all kinds of different shows. They may have, I know NCL actually hired an act called Not Elton John, who is a licensed Elton John impersonator who apparently puts on a really great show. But again, it's not actually Elton John. It's not
Right.
Elton John. When the Norway came out, when you would go to see these little, I call them snippet shows. They're kind of like a review with highlights of different Broadway shows and singers and songs. All of those shows included name talent. I'm sitting here trying to think of some of the people who lived aboard the Norway for weeks at a time doing shows. Phyllis Diller was a regular as one of the comedians. Flip Wilson was a regular comedian on board, and I'm drawing a blank on a list of names that at the time these were major celebrities, and that's the entertainment you got to see and experience aboard the ship.
Right.
So even adding the ugly hat on, which we called it the ugly hat because I don't remember who made the statement, but they said, yes, it appears that the France is now a very beautiful lady wearing a very ugly hat. which was true. And I never had the chance to sail on board the ship without the ugly hat by the time I really got involved with her, because my first actual sailing on the Norway was in August of 1999. Kind of a funny story that went with that. I was actually working in the field of computer database architecture, and I was hired by this firm to do this contract position. Just happened that my office was right down the road from their offices, so I would swing in once a week to pick up my paycheck. And they had sublet a little space out to these two ladies who ran a cruise travel agency. And I'd gotten to talking to them because they had this big model of the Titanic in there. And I said, is that really the best thing for a cruise travel agency to have as sort of, does that send the wrong message? I've always gotten a big laugh anytime I've gone into stores and seen what genius marketer came up with the idea of Amelia Earhart luggage. What you put on an airplane and it gets lost. I mean, that's not what I would name luggage. Why would I advertise cruising with a model of the Titanic? But every time I would go in there, they're like, well, when are you going to take a cruise? When are you going to take a cruise? And I finally told them, no, I have no interest in taking a cruise. That sounds horribly boring to me. I just don't see it. I said, now a proper crossing across the Atlantic Ocean on a proper ocean liner, I'd be all over that. And the next time I went in, they said, oh, we've been waiting for you to come by. I want to show you this. They had worked up this itinerary that would have me flying over to London aboard the Concorde. They knew I was a plane nut too, and coming back on the QE2. And I got to tell you, I thought about that long and hard for a long time because what a trip. But it was expensive. I mean, the ticket on the Concorde was multiple times what the crossing back on the QE2 was. And even though I was making really good money at the time, I finally came and said, yeah, ladies, I can't see putting out that much money for that, as cool as that would be. Well, the next week I showed up and they said, well, are you familiar with the Norway? I said, yeah, Norway used to be the France. I said, well, the Norway is going to be going to dry dock, and there's like a 2-week crossing that comes back that, because it's hard to find people able to take 2 weeks off to go to a crossing. They have a hard time selling them out. And when they showed me the price, I said, well, this is very reasonable. How much is the airfare? And they said, no, the airfare is included in that price. I said, what? I said, okay. And what if I stayed a few days in Southampton before we took off? And of course, the route purposefully was very Titanic-esque, from Southampton to Cobh, former Queenstown, then on to Newark, right? And then on to Miami. And it was just such an incredible deal. I said, you know what? Yeah, hook me up. I'm going to do it. And so that return crossing in August 99 was the first time I got to see the ship, and was just totally enamored, and was very disappointed that they didn't have. The only thing that really covered the history of the ship was, of course, when you're doing that long of a crossing, you have guest speakers. They had the late, great John Maxtone Graham on as a speaker, the author of The Only Way to Cross, one of the most respected ocean liner books ever written. And he's just was a fantastic speaker. In fact, one of the things he did was a talk that he did called John Maxtone Graham Reads the Phone Book, because he had several people say, I would come to one of your talks just to hear you, even if you were just reading the phone book. He had a great sense of humor. He and his wife were just wonderful people. And but that was it. As far as having something that the company had set up, there was one little display at the end of a deck that was the dead end of a deck that no one ever went to. And I got to know the captain and several crew members during that crossing, and said, it's a shame you don't have a ship's historian and somebody here talking about the history of this incredible vessel. And by the end of the voyage, the captain and some of the other officers and some of the other Norwegian crew members were like, "Well, there isn't one. Why don't you offer to do that? Why don't you become the ship's historian?" And I laughed. I was like, "Yeah, that's like running away with the circus. Sure, that would be a lot
Right.
of fun." Uh, 2 weeks after I got back, hammering at the computer again, going, "Man, I really miss being aboard that ship." On the last day of the voyage, the captain had given me a name and a phone number. So I want you to call this lady. And sure enough, I called her, and she said, "Oh yeah, Captain Loken told me about you. So how could we get you to come on board and be part of the ship and do this?" And after a couple of weeks going back and forth, everybody in my family thought I was absolutely crazy because I quit a high-paying job to make nothing uh, and go live on an old ocean liner. And I
Right.
absolutely loved it. And that's when I really got to digging into the history and all of the ins and outs, and starting to people would think I was crazy because it's like, "Well, you must love going to shore and the beautiful beaches in St. Martin." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't hardly ever go ashore." Like, "What do you
Yeah. It's
mean?"
not what it's about for you.
Right. Well, because when the passengers go away, I can play. I can go start exploring and trying to get into doors that I'm not supposed to be going into, and finding the old control rooms, the old fire control rooms, which
Right.
had become a copy shop. There was a copier in there, and all the old original switchboards and everything were in there. And I got to skulk about the ship. And of course, the officers and the captain knew that they didn't care where I went. They were fine with that. They knew I was exploring and taking pictures.
It's
So it,
funny you say that because my first cruise was last Thanksgiving, and I went on the Carnival Spirit, and
okay.
you know, you got it's families with young children and all this stuff, and I don't like having people in my videos other than people who agree to be in my videos.
Right.
So there was I forget what port we eventually went to, but I let everybody get off the ship, and that's when I went nuts with the
Yep.
camera. So I got
Yep.
all the footage I needed for a ship tour video. So I can relate to what you're talking about here.
Uh-huh. Yep. That was what I the only thing that really drove me ashore was to go eat, because I didn't always eat in the public restaurants. And if you've ever been a part of a cruise line, you'll know um that what they serve upstairs and what they serve downstairs are two different worlds altogether.
Right.
As one of our comedians said, "Oh yeah, the food they serve the crew here is fit for a king. Here, king, here, king." And he wasn't far off. It was pretty bad. But we had our secret little places in St. Martin where we would get off, and it was usually me and the dance troupe. So a whole bunch of crazy dancers would get in a van and go across the island to some of these little restaurants, so we could be away from the passengers and
Right.
kind of relax and have some good food. But most of the time, yeah, I would rather just stay on board. Um, More and more people, as I was doing the history lectures, wound up staying on board,
Right.
especially if we had some of the on weird occasions we had tried some different ports. Um, and on a lot of those ports, I noticed, wow, there's a lot more people aboard the ship than there are people going ashore.
Right.
But it
So
was fun.
so you joined her crew in 99. I believe '06 was her last year in service. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah. We lost her at '06, and I had actually decided to hang up my historian hat a little bit before then. We had managed to get her to come back, and ironically, on that last farewell crossing, which I spent a lot of the farewell crossing trying to keep people from stealing bolted down parts of the ship,
For artifact
and
souvenirs.
literally
What
taking the ashtrays off the
right.
walls. Yeah,
What
that kind of
was the
thing.
date of the final cruise?
Oh my gosh, I'd actually have to look that up. I should know because I've got shirts and it's all labeled and everything on there. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but I do remember it was the strangest thing because I got off in Southampton, and the ship was chartered to do uh, a CGT throwback cruise with a bunch of French chefs. Most everybody on board was from France or spoke French. And I said, I don't need to be on board for that cruise. As good as the food might be, I will be so out of place and just
Right.
inundated with questions and not able to speak French. I decided I'm going to get off in Southampton and I will be done. I will be done with the ship. So getting off in
Right.
Southampton was a very, very bittersweet thing. But I'm standing there, um, out on the enjoying parts of the dock that I could go to as a crew member that most people can't go to, looking up at the ship. And I stayed there. I stayed there all day long until she sailed away. And I just remember thinking, this is not the end. This isn't the end. This is not. It doesn't feel like the end. And it wasn't very long after that that the word came down that they were going to bring her back into service, and they're going to bring her back. And now that I'm
Mhm.
saying that, um, unless my memory is totally glitching, I can't actually tell you when that was because we had sailed from Miami to New York and then went to, was it Nova Scotia? And then headed across to the east doing the Arctic Circle route, which was real fun because the air conditioners and the ice machines were one unit. So if you wanted ice, you had to keep running the air conditioner. And so all the windows were sweating and it was freezing on board, and yet we're Arctic Circle route. And I don't remember how many days we were away, but having just come out of New York, it was September 11th, 2001. And we were getting
Wow.
the messages of trying to understand. They didn't, we did not have the right chip to receive our satellite that far north. The satellite service that we had was for around the equator in the tropics where we were in the Caribbean area. That far north, we
Mhm.
couldn't get our satellite. We couldn't get TV. In fact, our TV guy managed to contact the internet service, which was a brand new thing aboard ships then, and linked that into the TVs to try to get us some information. The first inkling that I had of what happened on September 11th was our captain coming on, and all he said in his very hard to understand English, uh, his accent had gotten messed up from working with so many Norwegians and Americans simultaneously over the years. All he really said was a plane had hit one of the twin towers, and that's all we knew at
Mm.
first. So it took us a long time to get information,
Right.
and it was very. I do believe that was the farewell crossing, because I stayed in Southampton a lot longer than I planned because I couldn't get back
Right.
for a while. But yeah, so the upside of that story is the ship did come back, and I came back and did a little bit of time on board, but realized that because in addition to being the ship's historian, I was also a member of the cruise staff, so I would do anything a cruise staff would do, and I'd kind of adopted a position of the admin cruise staff. So I did a lot of the uh, created the cruise news, which included a lot of history. I scheduled staff, I scheduled events, and did a lot of things with the blessing of the cruise director so that they could go do other things. I purposely took on those responsibilities and worked really well with them. But they were very, very long weeks. And
Yeah.
it wasn't long after I left that, unfortunately, age and operating, the ship was made to operate continuously. When the boilers were fired
Mhm.
up on that ship, they were never intended to be taken offline, powered down a little bit maybe, but not taken offline for months and months and months on end. But in order to
Right.
save on fuel, as a cruise ship, we were constantly firing them up, turning them, on and off, on and off, on and off. And I had been aware of the fact that those massive boilers were mounted on tracks that were about 2 feet long, and the region they had to be on those tracks was the expansion was such that the size would change so much those legs needed to move.
Mhm.
And one of the theories is that one of those legs could no longer move. And just because of age, there were microfissures. And unfortunately, one of the boilers gave up the ghost in Miami. There was loss of life, extreme damage to the ship. Um, I remember getting very upset because them talking about this explosion and fire aboard the
Yeah.
ship. And it's like, no, there was no fire. It was the explosion and damage and the quote unquote smoke was steam. That was a steamship. That was all high pressured steam. There was not a there wouldn't have been any fire on board with that much steam being blown around.
Right.
That was actually in 2003, and she was in Miami, and it was early in the morning when the boiler exploded, and that was the end of the ship. I had a lot of people going, "Well, aren't you going to do something to
Mhm.
try to save the ship again and have her turned into a hotel or something along those lines?" And I said, with the extent of the damage, that would be something that would be very, very hard to deal with.
Right.
Um, and some other things. I know the owners of the ship were probably not real anxious to have people given years and years and years to investigate and poke around and keep bringing up old wounds. So
Right.
they were very anxious to they had already wanted to. The CEO at that time had already wanted to get rid of the ship, so they saw it as a lucky stroke for them that they were able to get rid of the ship. So
It gave
I
them a
did
way
not.
out, essentially.
It gave him a way out, exactly. So yeah, I did not. I had some people pretty mad at me that I didn't put any effort in trying to preserve the ship. But it's still to this day very sad to me when I see the pictures of the ship beached and being slowly dismantled, and people even sometimes the very tip of the prow is on display in France, repainted back to black. And people will post that online every now and then, and I look at it with real mixed emotions because uh, I've had the privilege of standing in the prow of that ship in where all the hawsers are and be underway and look out through that big hole and see the water crashing over that bow foot while the ship was underway. Not at ocean transatlantic speeds, of course, but still underway.
Right.
It's kind of like part of me is happy that's there. Part of me is not happy that that's there. I was very upset that they didn't remove they took almost nothing out of the ship. Some people did manage to make purchases, and there's some memorabilia out there. They bought parts of the ship, uh, but I made an inquiry about some of the pianos on board and was told, well, you don't even want them anymore. They've been exposed to the elements and such so much those pianos aren't even worth saving. So it was a little bit of a
You know,
bad end, you know.
right. But you're kind of you're describing, and tangent just for a sec, how my feelings about what's happening with the SS United States right now. I mean,
Exactly
it's like I've I'm to the point where I've accepted what's going to happen.
right.
But it doesn't mean I have to like it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
That's where
better
I'm
than
at.
having her completely gone, cut up into
Yes.
little pieces and like the Norway is gone. There's nothing left of the Norway other than some memorabilia
Right.
and some components here there scattered about. So France Norway is as history as Olympic and some of the other great ocean liners that are gone.
Right.
If I had to choose between breaking and the artificial reef, I would choose the artificial reef.
Oh yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
that's some manner of preservation for the
It's a
ship.
no-brainer, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a little amazed that there are people. There's the prow right there. You've got a great picture
Yep.
of it. So
There's
yeah,
that picture
real.
you were talking about.
Yeah, that's the first time I've seen it with that must have been the unveiling because the light rig that's around it, that square lighting
Uh-huh.
setup is not normally there. A lot of the pictures I've seen, it's just
Okay.
there all by itself. And I'm sure a lot of people wonder what the heck that thing is when they walk by.
Right.
That's the tip of the prow right there.
Look,
And oh god,
it's
if I had a nickel for the number of times people would ask, "Hey, can we go up to the front?" No. No,
right.
under no circumstances are you allowed to go up on the prow of the ship. You're not Jack and Rose. Get over it. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, actually, Jack and Rose weren't supposed to be doing that either. So
That's right. They certainly would not have been allowed to stay up there either. So
there were signs on the breakwater that said no one beyond this point, you know.
right. It would have been a very treacherous trip up there to that. Could imagine trying to walk in heels over the gratings atop that anchor. That
Absolutely.
would have been a
Absolutely.
nightmare. So yeah, I'm glad you found that picture because that is like I said, I'd rather than have pieces like that. The SS United States. There's three locations in New York and one in Norfolk where they have the screws, the propellers are on display. In fact, the one in Norfolk actually has a large section of the shaft with it as well, which is pretty amazing. Which,
Nice.
by the way, if you're curious, I had to do a little bit of research myself because there is a screw still on the back deck of the Big U
Yes.
that you
Yes.
captured, which was obviously a screw that has been used because if you look at it, you can see there's cavitation indentions and being that it's bronze that it leaves its mark. But I did find a little bit of information that said yes, originally there were 8 screws created. Uh, a spare for each one. It's not unusual for a ship to damage or lose a screw, so they go ahead and make the
Right.
spare while they're at it. I have had zero luck finding out where the other 3 spares wound up. My guess is they got melted down long, long ago, but I've never found actually the history to say what happened to them.
This is a little off topic, but we're getting close to the end here anyway. Have you live near the in or near Dallas? Have you been to the hotel that has one of the screws from the Lusitania?
I have not. I'm aware of it. I just have not had a chance to go take a look. It's on my to-do list, though. Absolutely.
Is that not the most random thing? A
Yeah,
hotel in Dallas has a screw from the
yeah.
Lusitania.
Now that you said, I'm going to have to look up and figure out how did that come to be? Because usually artifacts are going to be somewhere near the water. They're
Right,
going to be near a
right.
port. They're going to be near where it was built. I know I'm actually from the Houston area, and I know that there's still an anchor uh, on display outside of a hotel that was deposited there during a very tragic explosion of a ship full of fertilizer in the 1940s, I think it was, 40s or
Mhm.
50s. I'm going to say it's 40s, and they just left the anchor where it landed, way,
Oh
way,
wow.
way, way from where
Okay.
the ship was. So you can kind of see that, how did this anchor get here? Well, it flew in of its own accord, but
Wow.
yeah, why in the world we have a Lusitania artifact in Dallas? I hadn't quite thought of it
Right.
that way, but you're right. Now I got to do a little research. You never know where things are going to wind up sometimes, but yeah, I will.
Exactly.
So far, the only I haven't been here. I only came here in September, and the only really super touristy things I did kind of happened on a weird lark. I have a friend who is really into the history and the story of Bonnie and Clyde. And I
Okay.
just happened to be driving along when my maps popped up and said the grave of Bonnie Barstow. And
Really?
so I popped by there and took some pictures for my friend and sent it in. It's really crazy because people leave bullets, shells, and lipstick on her grave all the time.
Wow.
And since I was at it, Clyde is actually buried a couple miles away. They'd originally been buried together, but her
Mhm.
mother had her relocated to where she is now, and she's actually buried next to her mother now. And of course, the cemetery where Clyde is not kept up at all. The grass is like crazy high, and I didn't even
Mhm.
bother trying to traipse over there and get a picture of it. It was just too much of a hassle to find
Right.
a place to park. And totally different. So that's the only real touristy thing I've done. But now you've reminded me, I got to go find a place to park and find a look at the Lusitania. Because I'm
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean Lucy is definitely one of the ones, and I've been dying to get back out to the Queen Mary. It used to be now since they just announced that she's profitable for the first time in decades, which I'm glad
Mhm.
to hear because I've been seeing that they have been returning a lot of the original spaces, original paneling, original things that had been hidden away over time. Uh, Sadly, there was a period that Disney had the lease to operate the hotel, and they did a great deal of damage to the originality of the ship.
That's
Sadly,
what I've heard.
but once upon a time, years ago, you could fly in on Southwest Airlines to the Orange County Airport there, hop over and spend a weekend in one of those original cabins looking out across the water on the Mary, pretty darn cheap. I mean,
Yeah.
it was not a lot, and it's something I recommended to a lot of ocean liner people. Go out and just enjoy the ship. I've been up there, I
Absolutely.
think, 3 times. Uh, the first time I was there, I was very, very young. I hardly remember it. It was so long ago that the Spruce Goose was still in the dome next door, if that tells you how
Mm.
long ago it was. Because the
It,
goose hasn't
it's
been there in years.
it's funny 'cause a friend of mine who found my channel through where I did a video where I built a scale model of the Queen. He found me through that, and we've become good friends since. He has a long history with the ship. He is
Oh, wow.
actually he's on the Queen Mary Heritage Foundation board now. He was recently got on that,
Oh,
and
excellent.
he can talk your head off about the Queen Mary. He knows it back to front.
I may have to get you to connect the two of us because I've been sorely tempted to do an event out on the Mary. I had started to do it several years ago and got sidetracked by a few things, but it's just such a wonderful experience. And if you're a fan of Art Deco like I am,
Mhm.
uh, and ocean liners, combined together,
Oh,
that
yes.
is that is just a great place to go. And well, since you're a little bit of a traveler and like things too, I'll let you in on uh, one of Houston's best kept secrets is at Hobby Airport. The original
Okay.
air terminal that was built in 1940 is still there. It's called the 1940 Air Terminal Museum. Not original, but accurate. And not only is it a beautiful Art Deco structure, but they have a massive collection of commercial airline memorabilia. I
Okay.
mean, from in fact, what you see on display is about a tenth of what they have in the warehouse.
Oh,
Uh, it's
wow.
a it's amazing. It's a beautiful structure. If you get a chance, we're in Houston. Go over. I think it's. I don't want to say it. I want to say it's the third weekend of every month they do a Wings and Wheels. So they'll often have classic cars. They do have a couple of airplanes that they display that they bring out, and then often some interesting airplanes will fly in as well
Okay.
from other museums. So it can be a full day's outing. It's also really affordable to lease if you're ever looking for a really unique venue to use. The Air Terminal Museum is really uh, there aren't many places anymore that you can actually walk right out to the taxiway of a major airport and watch 737s taxiing by and see
Right.
them without a fence being in between. And they offer that under supervision, of course, but still, it's
Right.
if you're a plane spotter, oh yeah, and if you're a Deco fan, definitely go hit
Uh,
that.
Coincidentally, I was out in the Houston Galveston area about a month ago. The Galveston Naval
Ah,
Museum.
yes, yeah, the
Yeah.
Cavallo, right,
Yep.
right.
The Stewart Cavallo. I did the restoration tour for the USS Texas.
Oh,
I actually did
nice.
I did the dry dock tour a couple of years ago, but for this tour is
Oh,
actually the first time I've actually been on the ship. And I went to the Houston Museum of Natural Science as well in downtown
excellent
Houston.
museum. Excellent
Yes, very
museum.
much so.
Yeah, I point Titanic fans to the Battleship Texas a lot of time because people don't realize you're talking the same era. You're
Yeah.
talking about the same time, and in fact, uh, used to be long ago, you had access to the engine rooms, which I hear that once she gets into her new pier there in Galveston, they are going to have hard hat tours down to the engine rooms again. But
Mhm.
basically, you're looking at a 50% scale version of the engines on the Titanic. They're the same
Right.
design, same. I don't think the same manufacturer, but the same concept. So if,
Right.
it's the closest you're going to get to seeing the real thing is on the
Hmm.
Battleship Texas. Excellent, and they've done an incredible job restoring the Texas.
They have.
Very impressed.
Oh, you know what? I want to let's close out with one more question
Sure.
here. So you mentioned this on the boat tour when you were talking about the SS United States. The SS in 1950 and 62 did not mean what it meant in 1912. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, and from my research, it's always been sort of one of those things that people sort of just kind of cut back on. We've always made the assumption that SS is steamship. And
Yes.
that always kind of bothered me because, like, well, steamship is one word. It's not steamship. Why would it stand for steamship? And there's a good friend of mine who actually went with me on the QE2's last westbound crossing, and he has been instrumental in the Delta Queen paddle boat.
Okay.
And he was one of the first ones that alerted me to, well, that there were screw steamships and paddle steamships. So an SS referred to the fact that it used a propeller, a screw, rather than a
Mhm.
paddle wheel. So you'd have a PS because people were often asking, I was on another cruise ship, why is it MV? And you have to explain, okay, there's a difference between a motor and an
Right.
engine and a
Right.
turbine. And if you want to get real technical, the Big U and the France are TSS. They're turbine screw steamships, which you will actually see in some older pictures. I know Mauritania, I've seen some pictures that it says TSS on it. And that's playing up
Hmm.
the fact that they had, even though, like, and with Titanic, technically got it because there was one, the center screw was a turbine, and the
Right.
outer two were steam reciprocating engines. So that was one of the things that we had in the cruise news, is one of those weird little trivia things that I threw out there, that the SS actually stands for screw steamship as opposed to
Nice.
just steamship. Yeah. Just one of those weird little trivial things that
Right.
amuses me.
Devin, do you have a website, social media, anything that you would like to promote before we wrap it up?
I don't have anything really related to ocean liners. I've kind of been away from it.
Okay.
Now I will share that I'm in the slow but tedious process of putting together a podcast and hopefully a YouTube channel that goes along with it. Um, it's called Eventrist. It's as means events of interest. My true love, aviation's a big high thing in my world. I actually spent 5 years teaching aviation at a high school program in Houston that we actually taught our students how to fly. They would graduate my course with a private pilot certification.
Wow.
And aviation's still number two, though, but event production and entertainment. I had a live variety show in Nashville for several years. Across the street from the Grand Ole Opry. It was called the Nashville Country Showcase. And I've been involved with stage productions and performing and radio broadcasting since I was in junior high school, and just love it. And because of that, in starting to think, well, do I want to open an event company? I realized I don't want to produce events for other people because I don't want to wind up becoming a wedding planner or, a
Yeah,
birthday
no,
planner. Yeah, not my.
indeed.
I like to produce my own kind of events. And
Right.
in starting to think about, well, what's a good way to go about doing that, I decided, well, let's start with a podcast. And it kind of evolved, though, into something a little different. Yeah, ultimately, I would like to have enough followers and listeners that I could then offer some events. But having been teaching at a public school during the pandemic and seeing the effects that had on people, and having worked aboard the Norway, and as I mentioned earlier, I was really sad to start seeing comments and seeing the reaction of people go, yeah, I don't like the idea that I'm being seated at a table with people I don't know. I don't
Hmm.
want to have dinner with eight strangers. I want to have a table for
Right.
two. And I started realizing, wow, people just aren't social the way they used to be.
Right.
And so that planted a seed. And then when the pandemic, and we were forced to be antisocial, and then we added in social media, which I call anti-social media, because now you have people who sit at home and they get depressed because look at all these wonderful things other people are doing. The whole point of interest became, look, don't be the guy that sits at home and goes, wow, that looks like fun. Be the one that goes and does
Go
it.
out and do it.
You need some social interaction in your life, even if it's just
Yeah.
because, I mean, you wind up, I mean, look at this. I bumped into you talking to you on the boat tour, and we have something in
Right.
common, and we got a social connection that came out of that. So right now, the of interest is getting geared up. We don't have it available anywhere at the moment. I'm trying to get about 15 or 20 episodes in the can before I start releasing them. Uh, that are basically like, look, if I can pique your curiosity about an event, maybe you'll go and try it. Maybe you'll go see what
Yeah.
it's all about. I just recorded one about the trip, and I'm just talking
Wonderful.
about my trip to go see the Alabama in the United States. Maybe one of the listeners, and maybe just like with your channel, which I really liked, that's inspirational to people to say, man, I'd like to see that in person. Well, go do it.
Definitely.
Go see it. Talk to the docents. Talk to the other people that are there. Be a little gregarious. Uh, I do a lot of volunteering with Comic Cons and things of that nature, and have always been amazed at how people kind of stick together. I want to see people. You're already in an environment where you have a shared interest. Talk to
Hmm.
them. Well, what would I talk to those people about? You're at a freaking Comic Con. Talk to them about Spider Man, or hey,
Right.
there's the actor who plays um, I got to work with Walter Koenig. There's Chekhov from Star Trek. Are you a Star Trek fan? Look around. Not too hard to find
Right.
somebody who probably likes Star Trek. Go find someone who's cosplaying it, wearing one of their monster maroons, and say, hey, did you make that yourself? Or did you buy that? Or that looks fantastic. There's a friend of mine who produces the Steampunk Festival down in Galveston. He's about to have the second annual Galveston Steampunk Festival.
Oh,
And
nice.
I really enjoyed going to the first one because people were so, actually, it may be on the third one now that I say that,
Mhm.
because people had this shared interest. They opened up. They started
Right.
talking about, hey, if I wanted to get this, or where did you get that part, or I love how you did this, and he was very creative with it. He had teapot racing, and the first one he held was at the Railroad Museum, which has recently been featured in 1923. If you watch that TV show, they did a lot of filming in Galveston. Uh, he actually had high tea aboard one of the passenger train cars, and I just thought that was a really cool experience. And
Right.
people went
Mhm.
in and sat down with people they didn't know and started up conversations. You didn't have to be stuck in your little group. So yeah, keep your eye on the horizon, and when of interest actually gets out there, I will definitely share that with you. You can pass that along to your
Yeah,
audience. And
I would definitely love for one to check it out myself, and I would be happy to promote it here on my channel as well.
I appreciate that. And I'm definitely
And
going to point people your direction because I
well,
think what
well,
you've got going on, like I
thank
said,
you.
it inspires people to go see this. If you have even an inkling in history, or you saw the Titanic movie and now you want to know more about it, dive deep in it. People ask me all the time on the ship, well, how in the world did you get interested in ocean liners? And I would say the Hindenburg. And they look at me like I was from Mars. It's like, no, I seriously, when I was in like junior high, I was assigned a book report and they said, pick one of these books. And I picked one on the Hindenburg because where I grew up, we were not far from where the Goodyear blimp had a base. So I would
Mhm.
frequently look up and see the Goodyear blimp. So I said, well, let's
Right.
learn about the Hindenburg. You won't find anything about the Hindenburg that doesn't reference Titanic. And lo and
Mhm.
behold, our little rural school library had a copy of A Night to Remember by Sir Walter Lord. And that was the next book I checked out. And it just snowballed from there.
Absolutely. That's
So
how it starts.
that's how it
Titanic's
starts.
the gateway drug. Titanic is the
Yeah,
gateway drug.
well, I talk about aviation the same way because I have been more than guilty about setting up people with discovery flights or introducing them to a private pilot. And with my students, we were in what they call a Title I school, that considered uh, schools in an area where students could need a little bit more help economically. And I often joked, I said, you realize that we're basically drug dealers. The first sample is free, but after that, get your money out because aviation's
Right.
really expensive. But the first time you get in a small airplane and go, I'm going to be doing an entire episode at some point in time on Avintrist, because I know there's so many people who find aviation interesting, and maybe you've
Oh,
been
for
on a
sure.
commercial airline before, but I'm here to tell you, being on a commercial airplane and flying in a single engine Cessna or little Piper or something like that are two totally different things. I had
Right.
the good fortune of being raised with a good friend of the family who was an aerobatic pilot, so I got to fly in air shows and do some craziness that I thoroughly enjoyed. I was too young to be scared at the time, and I would still do it today. Don't get me wrong; I
Mhm.
would go up in a heartbeat. I am a private pilot, even though I'm not flying currently, because that's an expensive hobby. But
Right.
a lot of people don't realize you can go to almost any small airport, and for less than $200, you can fly an airplane yourself, a single engine airplane.
Mhm.
And I want to encourage people to go. You really want to experience flight? You really want to see what it's like? Go fly an airplane. That's $200 is usually the max. Go do it. Go get out there and try it. Now, be
Right.
warned, you might get addicted, but if nothing else, you could say you've done it. And
Absolutely.
like you said, you never know where things may lead, right? So
And yeah, and going back to the big U, I mean, here she is in her final hours, still having a
right.
positive impact on people. Look at
Exactly.
us, and
Exactly.
look at the
Good point.
tourism boom there.
Right. Mobile's getting a lot bigger boom than they expected.
Yeah, I,
So it's
I
gonna
think that's
gonna be good for the
a
Alabama. Yep.
oh, for sure, for sure. I think that's a good spot to go ahead and wrap this
It
up right there,
is.
Devin.
It
Thank you
is.
so much for agreeing to come on and talk to me, and I know my viewers are going to get a real kick out of this one.
I hope so. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I can talk ocean liners, airplanes, and history all day long, as you can tell.
Well, yeah, you have an open invitation. You ever want to come back and talk about anything else, hey, you know how to reach me. Just hit me up.
Fantastic. Thank you much. I had a great time today.
Thanks, Devin. I was about to call you Derek. I'm so sorry.
I've been called
And I
worse.
put your name right here on the screen.
Oh, no worries.
Thanks again for watching, everybody. And as always, as soon as Devin lets me know about when his podcast and his channels be up, I will be sure to spread that information to you guys. And until the next time, you guys know the drill. As always, drive safely.